Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for a video that I hope will be able to help Battlefront players long into the future, as today I will be going through the best star cards for all 22 heroes and villains in Battlefront 2. The version of this video I released about 6 months ago has become rather outdated. Since then, 2 new heroes were added, 1 existing hero was completely reworked, and many others have been buffed or nerfed to the point where the best setups have changed pretty significantly. For almost every hero, I'm going to be giving you at least 2 loadouts, one for the large-scale trooper-based game modes like Supremacy Co-op and Galactic Assault, and a second loadout for hero-only modes like Heroes vs. Villains and Hero Showdown. There are a couple exceptions, as there are 1 or 2 heroes with whom I use an identical loadout for all modes, and there are also some heroes where I have more than 2 loadouts depending on the situation. I should just say that these are just the star card setups I personally use and have the best results with. I have been playing this game since launch, and while I'm certainly not the highest ranked player or anything like that, I've used every hero quite a lot, and I have each of their playstyles down well enough where I think I'll be able to help anyone not entirely sure what cards they should be running. I will have timestamps down below in the comment section to every single hero, so if there's a specific one you need to get to, or you are just returning to this video down the line to double check for a certain hero, you can use those timestamps to jump to whichever hero you need. Also, in the interest of keeping things not completely confusing for everyone, when I discuss the stats for each specific star card, I'm going to be basing those stats off the fully upgraded version of that card, because that'll just keep things a lot more simple so you guys aren't completely confused when I'm listing off like 5 different numbers for every single star card. We're going to be going through the lightsaber heroes first, light side then dark, and then once we're done with them we'll jump over to the non-lightsaber heroes. And if you want to just go through every single hero along with this video, feel free to pull up the menu and just go along hero by hero along with this video. Also, I am considering doing an updated version of this video for troopers, as well as one for reinforcements, so people have up-to-date versions to come back to in the future. So if those are videos you guys would like to see, let me know by leaving a like on this upload. If there is enough interest and enough of you want videos like that, I will get those out for you guys and for future players. Okay, before we get into the best star card loadouts for every Battlefront 2 hero and villain, we do have a quick sponsor for today's video who I'm really excited to work with for a second time, Displate. These guys produce really awesome and extremely high quality metal posters, and they are officially partnered with most major brands you can think of. Marvel, Star Wars, DC, you name it, and they probably have officially licensed displays of that brand. A couple months ago, they sent me a shipment of their posters. They had told me to pick out 3, which I did. 1 from Star Wars, of course, 1 from my favorite single player game, and 1 from my favorite show. However, when the shipment arrived, I was shocked to find out they had sent me not 3, but a dozen displays, including 7 different Star Wars designs, each of which are so cool. And even though I already have over 10 displays, there's been a bunch of other designs on their website I've had my eye on. In the time since then, I've had the chance to put up the 3 displays I picked out, and I was just so surprised at how easy they are to install. They come with everything you need, just simple magnets with an adhesive, and you can adjust the display as many times as you need on those magnets to make sure it's perfectly installed, so it's a stress-free process. They also have multiple different sizes, so whatever your needs are, Displate probably has you covered, and no matter the size, the prints are so high quality because these are officially licensed products. If you want to pick up some displays for yourself, which I highly recommend, all you have to do is use my link down below in the description to score yourself 20% off your entire order. You don't have to enter any code as long as you click my link in the description to head over to their website. The discount will be applied automatically at checkout. Alright, with that all out of the way, let's start out with Anakin, because what better place is there to start than with the Chosen One himself? Anakin is a hero who has changed a lot since my last star card guide, and because of that, my recommendations for him have also changed. For large-scale and trooper-based game modes, the first and most important star card you're going to want to be running is Raw Strength. This card increases the base damage of Heroic Might by 50, which allows the ability to one-hit kill most troopers. Without this card, Heroic Might won't kill anyone from full health, but with this card, it will insta-kill 3 out of the 4 trooper classes, and because of that, this card is essential. Next up, we have a card that is extremely underrated, All of Them. This card also increases the damage of one of Anakin's abilities by 50, although in this case the ability is his pull, and for the extra damage to be applied, you do need to be pulling at least 2 enemies. This card makes Anakin's pull a one-hit kill on 3 out of the 4 trooper classes whenever you're pulling at least 2 foes, and without this card, again, you won't be one-shotting anyone, but with it, Anakin's pull will instantly kill most troopers, and being able to clear out an entire choke point on command with a single pull is extremely satisfying and is a great way to earn health back quickly. For Anakin's 3rd star card for trooper-based game modes, you're going to want to be running Massive Strikes. This card increases Anakin's lightsaber damage by 20, which allows him to kill most troopers in a single swing. And if you're seeing a pattern here, yeah, we're basically making it so Anakin can one-hit kill almost every single trooper, no matter what he is doing. It makes him very, very powerful and almost unstoppable. This card was nerfed a few months back and does have a drawback now, as it does also decrease Anakin's stamina by 25%, but because without this card you'll have to swing twice to kill anyone, and with this card most troops will go down in just one swing, you're also going to be using way less stamina by killing troopers in one hit, and killing them faster also means you'll be taking less damage in a lot of situations, and it also makes it way easier to get health back in the first place, so this card is a must for trooper-based game modes. When it comes to hero modes, I run a mostly different setup. The only star card I keep is Raw Strength, as that extra heroic might damage is still great even against villains. For Anakin's second star card, I always run Attraction, which significantly increases the range of Anakin's pull. This card is just great for everything in hero modes. It allows you to catch a fleeing villain before they get too far, it makes pulling a pesky Boba out of the sky much easier, and it also saves you a ton of health by yanking blaster heroes to you from much further away. And the second you start getting used to having that extra range on his pull, not having it will feel like a huge downgrade because it is in that mode. For Anakin's third star card in hero modes, at least in heroes versus villains, you're going to want to be running Steamroll. This card slowly increases Anakin's stamina as he deals damage. For every 200 damage he deals to an enemy, his stamina increases slightly before maxing out at a massive 40% increase. If you are someone who can survive for a moderate amount of time in heroes versus villains, this card is just a must, as after you've built up that extra stamina, you can't beat this card. If I could only run one card in HVV, it would be this one. Anakin has some of the weakest stamina stats in the entire game, and managing your stamina when saber fighting is extremely important, and this card brings Anakin's stamina from nearly the lowest to nearly on par with some of the best. I can't recommend this card enough for hero modes because it is incredible. I also want to say that I don't recommend Massive Strikes in hero modes anymore. After they nerfed it to decrease your stamina, it just isn't worth using when you're trying to saber fight all the time like in that mode. You do not want to be decreasing Anakin's stamina when there are other cards for that mode that are far better without any drawbacks. Like I mentioned, Anakin's stamina is very poor, which really isn't a problem against troopers and most enemies when you can one-shot almost everyone with your abilities and regular attacks, but in hero modes it is an issue, and Anakin's other cards are just better than Massive Strikes when you're mostly facing off against other villains. I also want to mention that if you are a new player or just someone who is learning and struggled to survive long enough to build up the extra stamina from a card like Steamroll, feel free to throw in a card like Tenacious, which gives you an extra 100 health. It's not a huge upgrade, but Steamroll is only good if you are building up that stamina and staying alive, and Tenacious might make Anakin a bit more forgiving if you are new to Battlefront. That is also true in Hero Showdown, because the rounds are very short and you won't be dealing enough damage to actually build up your stamina. A card like Tenacious is a solid pick for your third slot in Hero Showdown specifically, but in other modes, I don't really recommend it unless you're a really new player. Moving on, let's talk about Obi-Wan Kenobi. For me, Obi-Wan is a super simple hero to pick cards for. I have a setup I always stick to in trooper modes, and a slightly different one I always stick to in hero modes. For large-scale game modes, you'll first want to run Jedi Resilience. This card increases the amount of health Obi-Wan can regenerate without getting any kills by 100, which brings him up to a whopping health regeneration pool of 400 HP, which is among the best in the game. This card is just excellent, I never remove it, and it's one of many things that makes Obi-Wan one of the most survivable heroes in the entirety of Battlefront 2. You can take a lot of damage and still regenerate a huge portion of your health pool, making it a lot easier to recover from all that damage. Next up, you'll want to run Forward, and this card is absolutely essential in trooper modes. If you're not running it, well, you're making things very difficult for yourself. Forward increases Obi-Wan's defensive rush damage by 40, which massively improves the ability, as with this card, it will one-shot all troopers other than heavies. If you aren't running this card in trooper modes, you really should be, because it makes defensive rush a much stronger ability against troopers specifically. Finally, for Obi-Wan's third card, I personally like to run Safeguard. This card decreases the amount of stamina Obi-Wan uses for everything by a massive 40%. Like Anakin's card, Obi-Wan has to slowly build up that extra stamina, and he earns that stamina by blocking shots and other attacks. However, because all you have to do is block some shots and other attacks to build up that stamina, this one charges up to max way faster than Anakin's. Moving over to hero modes, you're going to want to stick with two of the cards I already recommended. Jedi Resilience for the extra health regen, as it's just as useful in hero modes, and Safeguard, which is even better in heroes versus villains, as stamina is even more important in that mode. For Obi-Wan's third slot, I like to run his other stamina card, which is called Perfect Defense. This one improves Obi-Wan's blocking stamina by 40%, and with this card you just get that improvement right away. This card only improves Obi-Wan's blocking stamina, not his attacking and blocking stamina like Safeguard, which is why I prefer Safeguard overall. But in hero modes, combining both of his stamina cards is insane. It makes his block pretty impenetrable, as your stamina is going to be far better than anyone else's. When you have both of Obi-Wan's stamina cards equipped, it's going to be very difficult for any lightsaber villain to kill you, because you can basically just let them use all of their stamina trying to even damage you, and then end them when they run out of stamina and you still have half a tank. These cards combined also make holding off an entire team possible. His stamina is just that good with both equipped. If you are in a mode like Hero Showdown where you can't build up that extra stamina from a card like Safeguard, you can always take that card off and put on something like Forward for the extra defensive rush damage, or even Quick and Focus to charge up your push a little bit faster. Next up, let's talk about Yoda, and Yoda is a hero with quite a few options, but these are the ones that I prefer to use and I think are the strongest choices overall. For trooper modes, Yoda's best card is by far Agility. This card gives Yoda a third dash attack with a slight recharge increase, but Yoda really benefits from a third dash. Yoda's dash makes him difficult to hit and also cuts right through lightsaber blocks, and because Yoda has a relatively slow swing speed and lightsaber damage compared to other heroes, a third dash really helps him out. The next card I like to run is Feel the Force, and this card just increases the health Yoda gets from presence by 60 HP, which is very nice. You have an extra cushion before damage starts digging into your health that you can't regenerate without kills, which can be a lifesaver. The third card I like to run is Jedi Mentor, and this card decreases the overall damage Yoda takes by 8%. This card is just a personal preference. It's not a hugely noticeable upgrade, but 8% overall damage reduction is significant and will save you at times. However, if this card isn't one you want to run, I wouldn't say it's essential, and if there is another card you just personally like to run yourself, swapping this one out isn't going to make a huge difference because Yoda has a bunch of cards that are decent, and you can experiment with your third slot to find out what is right for you and your playstyle. For hero modes, again, you're going to want to run Agility for that third dash. Like I mentioned, Yoda's dash cuts right through blocks, and you'll be doing yourself a huge disservice not running this card. I also love Feel the Force in hero modes because, again, that extra 60 HP from presence is a lifesaver sometimes. Finally, and this card is essential for hero modes, you need to be running Opposing the Dark Side in your third slot. This card increases Yoda's lightsaber damage against villains by 16, which in a mode like heroes versus villains, since you're only going to be damaging villains, this is just a flat damage increase for Yoda, which he definitely benefits from greatly. Moving on, let's jump over to Luke Skywalker, and to me, Luke has a definitive best setup. I basically never mess around with the cards I use for Luke, because the three I like to run serve me so well. The first and most important card you should be running is Intensify. This card slowly increases Luke's lightsaber damage as you deal damage and get kills, and after you've killed 18 troops or dealt enough damage to villains and reinforcements, the card will max out at an increase of 36 bonus damage. What this means is that Luke will be able to one-hit kill 3 out of the 4 trooper classes with his regular lightsaber attack, and even one-hit kill heavies if he's hitting them in the back. This card makes Luke an absolute powerhouse. Troopers and reinforcements stand no chance, and even Luke becomes a much bigger threat to even a villain like Vader with this card maxed out. In large-scale modes, this card should be run at all times. It's by far his strongest card. For slot number 2, you'll want to be running Epicenter. This card increases the damage of repulse by 40 in the center of the radius, which allows you to one-shot most troopers. However, this card also has another perk, as running this card causes repulse to deal the full bonus 40 damage through blocks. So with this card, even if Vader or Kylo or whoever with a lightsaber is blocking, you will be dealing all of that bonus damage right through that block every single time you use repulse. This is great for finishing off a low health enemy, and even without that extra perk, this card is still worth a slot because it makes repulse way more reliable when using it in the center of a group of enemies. Finally, the card you should be running in slot number 3 is Extended Push Reach, which increases the range of Luke's push by 30%. This card is just going to significantly increase the amount of kills you are getting with Force Push. Using it in choke points and other heavily populated areas, the extra range is just going to get you extra kills constantly, and it also helps save you from getting lit up from those firing at you because you can push them from further away. These 3 cards I likely never mess with because they make up by far the best setup for Luke in my opinion, and I heavily recommend running this setup to see how it works for you. In Heroes vs Villains, my setup is pretty similar. I stick with Intensify as that card is just as incredible against heroes, and Epicenter is an easy choice for both the bonus damage and the damage through blocks. For his 3rd star card slot, I usually take off Extended Push Reach as it really isn't necessary in hero modes, and instead I throw on Rush Immunity, which gives Luke 15% damage reduction for 3 seconds after he uses his Rush. You can give Luke a 3rd rush with a slightly increased cooldown via his Jedi Reflexes star card, but in my opinion, Rush Immunity is a better choice for that damage reduction. And in Heroes vs Villains, Intensify and Epicenter are both so strong that you really only have one extra slot to work with, and I personally think his strongest overall setup will have you running Rush Immunity in slot number 3. The only time you should mess with that setup in HVV is if you are on a map with a lot of ledges, where you can push people off and just yeet them out of the map, and in that situation I recommend taking off Rush Immunity and instead throwing on Stronger Push, which will cause Push to send enemies flying twice as far, making it easier for you to get ledge kills. In Hero Showdown, you're also going to want to run a slightly different setup, as Intensify doesn't really benefit you in Hero Showdown because there aren't going to be enough enemies in one round to build up your damage to the point where Intensify would be worth it. In that game mode, you'll want to stick with Epicenter and Rush Immunity and swap out Intensify for Jedi Reflexes, which, as we mentioned, gives Luke a 3rd rush, and because Intensify isn't really a valid option in that game mode, Jedi Reflexes fills that slot nicely. Okay, next up, let's go to the sequel era and talk about Rey, who to this day is still very strong in trooper-based game modes, and is yet another hero that has a setup that is by far her best. In large-scale modes, the first card you'll want to run is Damaging Strike. This is her best card hands down. It makes the first hit of her Dash Strike a one-hit kill on all troopers but heavies, and for every person she hits with a use of Dash Strike, that damage will increase by 30%. So if you Dash Strike into a choke point and hit 3 or 4 enemies, you'll start one-hit killing heavies and even some reinforcements like aerials really often. Just being able to one-hit kill with Dash Strike would be more than strong enough for this card to be worth a slot and to be her best, but with the other perk, this card is just insane and you need to be running it. The other card you'll want to run in trooper modes is Resilient Dash, which pairs incredibly well with Damaging Strike. This card gives Rey 40% damage reduction during her dash, which is ridiculously helpful. If you Dash Strike into a choke point, you are going to be taking some damage, sometimes more than you like, but this card mitigates that damage by 40%, which is huge. If you aren't running both of these cards in trooper modes, you are really making things harder for yourself, because this is one of the strongest card combos in the entire game. For her 3rd and final card in trooper modes, you're going to want to run Focus Sight, which is another incredibly strong card. This card increases the duration of Insight by 7 seconds, bringing the ability from a 10-second duration to 17, and with that it comes close to doubling the duration of an already very strong ability, which is insane. That is 7 extra seconds of extra damage, double stamina, and wall hacks, and I mean, it hardly gets better than that. This is a very good card you should be running. In hero modes, you'll want to stick with Damaging Strike for the extra base damage, and also Focus Sight for the longer Insight. However, Resilient Dash isn't really necessary here, as you won't be getting lit up by blasters while using Dash Strike very often, so instead I'd recommend Opportunist. This card gives Rey a 15 damage boost against enemies who are immobilized by any hero's ability, so if they've been mind-tricked by you or Obi-Wan, or stunned by Chewbacca or Lando, you will deal an extra 15 damage per swing during that time. This just pairs really well with Rey's mind trick, as that extra damage is instantly noticeable. Now that we've covered the light side Saber heroes, let's move over to the Saber villains, starting out with Maul. For trooper modes, Maul has 2 star cards that are essential, and the 3rd slot you can kind of play around with. The first card you'll always want to run is Lightsaber Defense. This card decreases the damage Maul takes from blasters by 16%, and in trooper modes, most of the damage you take will be from blasters, so this card kinda speaks for itself. Next up, you'll want to run Flow Motion, and this card gives Maul a 3rd spin attack with, again, a very slight recharge increase that is well worth the trade-off. Maul's spin attack is great for clearing out objectives, for closing ground between enemies without taking damage, and for getting out of a bad situation very quickly. Even though Maul's spin attack has some hit detection issues, Flow Motion is still well worth a card slot just for the versatility it gives you. For Maul's 3rd slot, I recommend running either one of his Saber Throw cards. Personally, I prefer Range Throw, which increases the distance you can throw his saber by 50%. I find this card makes Maul's throw so much better at hitting targets twice, and it also allows you to snipe people with the throw from further away than they'd expect you to. However, Maul also has a quite popular star card called Accelerated Throw, and this card increases your saber throw damage by 20. It won't allow you to one-hit kill anyone, but it will be a bit more reliable at finishing off weak enemies. I personally prefer Range Throw, but I think Accelerated Throw is an equally valid choice for your 3rd slot. For hero modes, most of the time you're going to want to stick to just one setup, which is flow motion for the third spin attack, plus both of Maul's saber cards, range throw for the distance and accelerated throw for the damage. However, there are situations where that isn't specifically the best setup. As I mentioned, lightsaber defense only gives Maul damage reduction against blasters, so if you're playing in a lobby where every enemy, or even 3 out of the 4 are using saber heroes, this card will do little to nothing for you. However, if you do get in a lobby where there are multiple blaster heroes on the enemy team, you will want to run this card for that protection. Whether you swap this card for range throw or accelerated throw is up to you. I think either are perfectly valid choices for hero modes. Also, if you are playing on a map like Kashyyyk or Bespin, which has a ton of ledges where you can throw people off the edge of the map, Maul does have a card called Forceful Thrust, which doubles your throw distance, which is well worth using in those specific situations, but only on maps where you can throw enemies off of ledges. On other maps, this card will just hurt you as you'll be throwing enemies further away, giving them more time to regen health and making getting to them take even longer, which does nothing to help you and only helps your enemies. So, flow motion and Maul saber throw cards most of the time, but swap out a saber throw card for lightsaber defense if you are dealing with more than one blaster hero, and feel free to throw on Forceful Thrust if you are on a map like Kashyyyk or Bespin, where you can yeet people off the edge of the map. Next up, we have my boy Count Dooku. While Dooku does have a lot of very strong cards, I have 2 setups I really do like and have served me very well. For trooper modes, the first card that is a must in my opinion is Sith Control. This card increases Dooku's health regen pool by 120, and with this card he can regenerate 370 health without needing any kills, which is great. Health regeneration cards are almost always a strong choice. The second card I like to run is Last Seconds, and this reduces the recharge time of Dooku's lightning stun by 4 seconds, and with this card you can use his stun every 10, which is so great. Dooku tends to have some issues with hit detection. With him more than any other hero, I feel like my saber is cutting right through enemies sometimes without hitting them, and lightning stun is great as a failsafe to kill off anyone who is rolling around like a madman, so having this ability ready as often as possible is hugely beneficial. Finally, you'll want to run Balanced Duelist, which reduces the cooldown of Duelist by 4 seconds, and because Duelist allows you to one-shot most troopers with a saber swing while also increasing your swing speed, this card is just excellent. For hero-based game modes, you'll only want to make a single change. Keep Sith Control for the extra health regeneration, and keep Balanced Duelist for the reduced Duelist cooldowns, but swap out Last Seconds for Masterful Duelist, which increases your saber damage during Duelist by 20. Against troopers, this doesn't change the amount of swings to kill them, but against heroes, this card is incredible. You need as much damage as you can get. Pairing together both of Dooku's Duelist cards turns the ability into an absolute powerhouse in HVV, and the extra health regeneration from Sith Control is super nice for extra survivability. Those 3 cards are the setup I use 95% of the time in hero modes. However, I do want to say that I think Finesse is also a strong choice. Finesse can be very nice at times, especially against really try-hard teams. If you don't think you need the extra health regeneration and feel like extra stamina is more your style, you can take off Sith Control and instead use Finesse, as this card is a strong and very valid choice if you do prefer that extra stamina. For General Grievous, I'm happy to say that I feel like I've recently finally fully committed to a setup for this guy. I've always been someone who switched around General Grievous cards a lot, but finally, I think I found the perfect setup that is his overall strongest, especially in hero modes. Grievous is a hero that has an extremely strong lineup of star cards. With most heroes, if you somehow manage to equip all 9 star cards at the same time, they wouldn't really change that drastically. But with Grievous, he would almost become Launch Anakin. His star cards are that strong. Because of that, picking just 3 star cards is hard, but I think I've fully settled on the strongest setup for him. First, you're going to want to run Line Up Weaklings. This card increases the damage of Claw Rush by 50 after you've hit one enemy, which means you'll be able to one-shot troopers. This is incredible when you're going through a choke point. You will wipe out everyone in your path effortlessly. This also works on heroes and reinforcements, and because Claw Rush can now hit the same enemy twice, if you hit a hero and then loop around and hit them a second and third time, you will have that increased damage on every hit after the first, and this is probably his most important card overall. It makes Claw Rush insanely good, even though it's already a very strong ability. The second card you'll want to run is Flesh is Weak. This card gives Grievous 5% damage reduction for every 10% of health missing, and this card makes Grievous an unbelievable tank. I did some testing in arcade, and this card effectively gives Grievous almost 1000 health, 980 to be exact, because that damage reduction kicks in the second you drop below 90% of your full health, and only increases the lower on health you get. This card does have a slight drawback as it does increase your health regen time, so once you start regenerating your health it will fill up slower, but it's well worth the trade-off and you get used to it so quickly. Use this card guys, it will save you in so many situations. Finally, for Grievous's third star card, I'm going to give two options because both of these cards are very helpful, and I tend to switch them out depending on the situation. The first card I like to run is Sith Trained, and this card increases Grievous's lightsaber damage by 30, but also reduces his attacking stamina by 25%. This card is well worth a slot in most trooper modes, as it allows Grievous to one-hit kill most troops, which is great. You have to be very wary of your stamina as it is quite low and even worse with this card, but being able to one-hit kill troops is worth the trade-off in most large-scale modes. However, while I do think the card's Flesh is Weak and lineup weaklings are both absolutely essential, I think Sith Trained is a bit less so, because unlike someone like Anakin, Grievous is far more reliant on his abilities than his regular attacks. Don't get me wrong, Sith Trained is a very nice card to have, and I recommend it a lot of the time, but another really nice card to use is Beating Heart, which is just Grievous's extra health regen card. This card, when combined with Flesh is Weak, makes Grievous so hard to take down it's almost unbelievable. You can take an absolutely massive amount of damage and still find yourself with a ton of health because that damage reduction will spare you so much of your health and Beating Heart will increase what you can regen. I always have a hard time deciding between Sith Trained and Beating Heart, but what I always do nowadays is I run Sith Trained in Galactic Assault Co-op and the ship phase of Supremacy, and Beating Heart I use in Supremacy on the ground phase. In Phase 1 of Supremacy, half the players you'll be dealing with are weak AI that are going to go down in one hit regardless of Sith Trained, so I find Beating Heart to be the better option. In Phase 2 Supremacy, Galactic Assault, and even Co-op, everyone is going to have that full standard health. You won't be dealing with like 50 HP AI, so the one-hit swings from Sith Trained is just better than the extra health regen. So to summarize, Flesh is weak and lineup weaklings in slots 1 and 2 every single time, and I think slot 3 is up for grabs between Beating Heart and Sith Trained depending on the mode and personal preferences. Moving on to hero modes, unsurprisingly you're going to want to stick with Flesh is Weak, which is perhaps even better in hero modes. Lineup weaklings should also be used, as like I said, that extra damage will apply when hitting the same target multiple times. For Grievous's third card, most of the time I just run Beating Heart for that extra health regeneration, as it's very nice to have and makes Grievous very survivable. I do want to make this clear, do not use Sith Trained in hero modes. I can see where it might seem like a good idea, but the stamina trade-off is not worth it in hero modes, like at all. You need that extra stamina and additional swings, and the last thing you want to do is run out of attacking stamina when your abilities are on cooldown. I do want to give an honorable mention to a card I find to be pretty underrated in hero modes, and that card is Jedi Killer. This card increases the range of Thrust Surge, which allows you to lock on from 50% further away. I find that this card significantly improves the ability and makes surprising enemies with a takedown much easier. Personally, I prefer running Beating Heart for the extra health regen, as combined with Flesh is Weak, it's pretty insane how tanky Grievous becomes, but Jedi Killer is a fun card in slot number 3 if you want to use it. It would definitely still be an excellent setup. Alright, it's time for Darth Vader, who is a villain similar to Grievous with a ton of excellent star cards. Out of his 9 cards, I would say you could make a decent argument for 6 of them as being strong choices in the right situation, but I'm going to give you the best setups that I use, which actually only amounts to 4 different star cards in total between every game mode. I have a very specific setup that has only given me great results with Vader. The first card I always run and never remove is Furious Resilience. This card is probably his strongest and most important overall, as it gives Vader 25% damage reduction during Focused Rage, which is extremely strong. Focused Rage is the type of ability you activate just before you run headfirst into a fight, and that extra 25% damage reduction when paired with the extra health Focused Rage gives you means you have to take an insane amount of damage before enemies even begin to damage you past the point of regeneration. Furious Resilience should really never be taken off. It is very strong. The second card I use for Vader basically all the time is his bonus health star card. This card improves his maximum health by 150, which is already significantly better than the other hero health cards. But more importantly, this card just pairs really well with Furious Resilience and with Vader's overall playstyle. In modes like Galactic Assault or Supremacy, I always run There Is No Escape, which increases the travel distance of your lightsaber throw by 50%. Even after the lightsaber throw nerf, this is still going to score you a ton of extra kills and choke points, not only because you'll be hitting enemies from further away, but because his throw is way more likely to hit someone twice with this card on, the extra distance makes smacking someone on the way to them and on the way back way more common. In hero modes, you're going to want to take off There Is No Escape and instead run Punishing Grip, which increases your choke duration by 40%. This card is just a great all-around card against other heroes. You'll deal more damage, you'll be able to pull people off of ledges with his choke way more often, and if you have teammates nearby while you're choking someone, those enemies are going to be vulnerable for far longer and give your teammates a chance to deal a ton of damage to them. These are basically the only cards I use for Vader. Bonus health and Furious Resilience at all times, and for my third slot I run There Is No Escape in Trooper modes and Punishing Grip for hero modes. For our final dark lightsaber hero, we have Kylo Ren, who is one of those heroes where you should be running almost a completely different setup between hero modes and trooper modes. In large-scale game modes, Kylo has a very clear best setup. The first card you'll want to run is Closing In, which increases the distance Kylo can travel while using Frenzy. I feel like this card might be a little confusing for new players, as it doesn't increase the lock-on range of Frenzy, meaning it doesn't make it so you can jump to your first target from further away, but instead this card increases the distance between enemies Kylo can leap. If you're still confused, let me try to explain. Kylo's Frenzy is a one-hit kill on most troopers, and Frenzy has 3 swings in total. If your first swing kills your first enemy, Kylo will then jump to a second enemy if there's one in range, and if that person also dies on the first hit, Kylo will then jump to a third target if there's another one in range. This card simply increases the area that Frenzy will scan for new targets after you've hit your first one. Because Closing In increases your range by 40%, which is massive, this card is going to score you a ton of free kills because Kylo will be jumping all over the place, killing everyone in a very large area. Next up, you'll want to run Harsh Pull, which increases the damage of Pull by 50. By itself, Pull only deals 10 damage, so this card brings that up to 60. While this does make killing weak enemies in a choke point a lot more common, the real reason to use this card is that any non-heavy troopers that are pulled to you will then be a one-hit kill. Without it, Kylo can pull a group of specialists and officers to him, but then he'll just be surrounded by enemies that still need 2 full swings to kill. With this card, you'll be able to one-hit all of them, which will save you a ton of health, and will just make your life a lot easier. For Kylo's third card slot, you'll want to run Power Reach. This card pairs incredibly well with Harsh Pull. You'll be able to pull more one-hit enemies to you and from further away, and also this card is just really great for catching enemy heroes off guard in large-scale modes. Obviously, that isn't the focus or main reason to use it, but the ability to really surprise enemy heroes who think they are out of your reach is a really nice bonus. For hero-based game modes, the only star card you'll want to keep that we haven't already covered is Power Reach. The ability to catch heroes off guard who are trying to escape or who think they are out of your reach is incredibly helpful, and this card always stays on for me. The second card you'll want to run in hero modes is Bloodlust, which increases the overall damage of Frenzy by 60 or 20 per Frenzy swing. For his third card slot, I tend to mix it up depending on the type of team I'm playing. If I'm playing against a team with 2 or more blaster heroes, I like to run Power of Darkness, which increases Kylo's regular lightsaber damage after using Frenzy by 14, which is a very nice boost. Against blaster heroes, this allows you to frenzy them and then finish them off really quickly with your extra damage. However, I find that when playing Kylo, most lightsaber heroes will just block spam you after you frenzy them, and a lot of the time you'll miss out on that bonus damage window before you get more than a single hit in, which makes this card kind of not that great. Against a team of mostly lightsaber heroes, I instead like to run Solid Freeze, which increases the range of freeze by 30%, which is much like Power Reach, in that the extra range really catches people off guard a lot. They'll think they're safe, and then you surprise them with a freeze from behind. I do need to address one card I recommended last time that hasn't changed since my last video, but I no longer use and no longer recommend, and that card is Resilience. This card is supposed to increase your damage by 20 and give you 10% damage reduction while you're in close proximity of other villains. However, this card always felt weird to me in hero modes. Sometimes it was clear as day, I definitely felt like I was getting that damage boost and was taking a bit less damage, but other times I felt like this card just wasn't working even though I was right next to other villains. Well, after a bit of testing, I found out why. It turns out this card only works with half of the other villains. If you are near Phasma, Iden, Bossk, Boba, or BB9E, this card doesn't work whatsoever. It does nothing, and I have no idea why. After I did that testing and figured out why this card felt so inconsistent, I just decided not to bother with it anymore. It's already a card that only benefits you if you're near another villain, and as it turns out, it only works with half of the villains, so I would rather just use a card that fully works and I can rely on, and I would recommend you guys do the same. Alright, we finally made it to the non-lightsaber heroes, so the blasters, droids, and Palpatine, and we'll start out with the light side heroes. First up, let's talk about Chewbacca, who in full honesty is very rarely the best choice in large-scale game modes. With that said, he does have a setup that is very fun in close quarter situations filled with choke points, and that setup starts with what I consider to be his best star card, Impervious. This card gives Chewbacca damage reduction that increases by 2% every time he deals at least 200 damage with a single use of an ability. With both Charge Slam and Furious Bowcaster, most of the time you will blow right past that threshold. So once you have this bad boy fully built up, you will have a permanent shield of nearly 40% damage reduction, which makes Chewbacca feel a lot more like a tank. Chewbacca also does have a bonus health star card, but you really can't afford to run both because those other two slots are needed for more important cards. Impervious is a much stronger card overall, so if you can stay alive long enough to build it up, I would really recommend using it, and I'd only recommend running bonus health in trooper modes if you're very new and just don't think you'll be able to stay alive long enough to benefit from it. Do not run both though, because like I said, those other two slots are needed for other cards. The second card you'll want to run is Charging Frenzy, which increases the damage reduction Chewbacca has during his Charge Slam by 50%. He already has 30% by default, but with this card it'll bring him up to 80% damage reduction during the ability, plus the leftover 20% damage reduction you'll be taking will also have the 36% damage reduction applied to it if you also have Impervious maxed out, which means you'll have over 87% damage reduction during his slam, which is very needed because the best way to rack up a big kill streak with Chewbacca is by hovering around choke points and charge slamming in, as it one-hit kills all troopers. However, the running animation for the Charge Slam can be very long, and you will take a good amount of damage if anyone is paying attention, so Charging Frenzy is essential. Impervious also helps by significantly reducing the damage you'll take while retreating, so again, I really recommend Impervious over bonus health. For his third card slot, I'm going to give you two options. The first is what I use if I pick Chewbacca in large-scale modes. When I pick Chewbacca, it's because I want to go all in on his Charge Slam. It has a pretty modest 15-second cooldown, which means every 15 seconds you can run in and wipe out a choke point, and in between, you can position yourself safely and pick off people with his Bowcaster. Because I prefer to go all in on his Charge Slam, I almost always run the card Slammed in my third slot, and this card increases the damage of Charge Slam by 50 in the center half of his radius. This is going to have you one-hit killing all aerials, and finishing off other reinforcements and even villains a lot more often. And because most of the time you'll leave no survivors in a choke point if you're running this card, you're also going to be taking a lot less damage. However, this card isn't quite as necessary as others, and he probably does have a better overall card for slot number 3, which is Echoing Roar. This card increases the duration of Furious Bowcaster by 40% every time you get a kill with it, and this is a very good card for Chewie. However, the only situations where Chewbacca himself is one of the best picks in Galactic Assault or Supremacy is when you can really capitalize on his Charge Slam, and if you want to fully commit to that, you need Slammed. However, Echoing Roar is a better overall card for general situations, so if you just want to run around on Geonosis or some open map as Chewbacca for some reason, this will be a better card overall, but ultimately, Chewbacca himself isn't really the best pick if you aren't in close quarter situations, so I almost always stick with Slammed, Impervious, and Charging Frenzy to just wipe out choke points and dominate those choke points. For hero modes, things are a bit trickier, as many of Chewbacca's cards fit hero modes very well, which makes it kind of hard to pick the best ones. His best card against villains is definitely Extended Shock, which increases your shock duration by 40%, which is kind of insane. It's a huge increase in shock time, which will allow you to finish off most villains combined with Furious Bowcaster in one go. For my second two cards, I almost always focus on beefing Chewbacca up and making him more of a tank by running both Impervious and bonus health. The slam cards aren't really great in this mode, which leaves you with two slots to run both health cards, which really does help his survivability against other villains, which honestly sometimes feels quite low compared to some of the other blaster heroes. If you are playing Hero Showdown where you can't build up Impervious, take that card off and replace it with Shocked and Vulnerable, which increases the damage enemies take while shocked by 9%, which doesn't sound like a ton, but is quite helpful when combined with Extended Shock, especially as succeeding with Chewbacca in Hero Showdown often comes down to how effective you are with your first stun in Furious Bowcaster, so you need all of the quick and rapid damage you can get in that mode. Next up, let's talk about Han Solo, who is a very straightforward hero to choose cards for. He has several that are not even close to being worth using, which makes picking out the best ones quite easy. I'm going to keep this one very short. For trooper modes, you'll first want to run Broad Shoulders. This gives Han 40% damage reduction during his shoulder charge, so whether you're escaping or charging headfirst at someone with a blaster, you'll be taking 40% less damage while doing so, which is great. Next up, you'll want to run Air Burst, which increases the damage of Detonite Charge by 20% if you blow it up in mid-air, which you pretty much always should be doing in trooper modes because you don't want to give people a reason to get away from it or even a chance to. That 20% extra damage will score you extra kills and choke points pretty consistently, and Air Burst is probably his best overall card. Finally, you'll want to run Heavily Modified Blaster, which reduces your heat buildup on your DL-44 by 25%, meaning you'll be able to fire more shots before overheating, which kinda speaks for itself. More shots equals less reloading or less cooling down your blaster, which is always a very good thing. In hero-based game modes, you'll want to stick with Heavily Modified Blaster, which is even better in hero modes, and Air Burst is also essential, as that 20% extra damage will benefit you every single time you hit someone with Detonite Charge. For his third card slot, I used to just run Broad Shoulders, which is also very good in hero modes for mitigating damage, but recently I've started to use Smuggler's Wits, and at this point, I would say if I could only use one card in hero modes, this could be it. Smuggler's Wits gives you a third roll, so you can use a roll 3 times in a row instead of 2, and this card is pretty incredible if you know how to dodge attacks as Han, as you can basically roll whenever you need to. Smuggler's Wits does have a downside as it increases your cooldowns by 2 seconds, but really this is basically just a downside for Detonite Charge. Even with this increase of 2 seconds, Shoulder Charge will always be available when you need it, and Sharpshooter, well, let's just say the slightly increased cooldowns doesn't really matter with that ability. Having to wait an extra 2 seconds for Detonite Charge is a slight bummer, but the third roll allows you to dodge so many extra attacks and deal damage in between those attacks that it's become an essential part of my hero setup, and I really recommend getting used to rolling and dodging with Han, as it's a huge part of what can make him so viable as a blaster hero. Next up, we have Leia, who is a lot like Han and has a very straightforward best setup. Right off the bat, in all game modes, you're going to want to run Relentless Firing. This card increases the firing time of her E11 by 55%, meaning you can fire the most powerful close-range hero blaster in the game for 55% longer. You'll want to pair that card with Rebel Heart, which grants Leia 25% damage reduction while using the E11, and those two cards together are insanely powerful, as you'll have the best close-range blaster in the game for a long time, with very strong damage reduction the entire time. For her third star card, in most situations, you're going to want to run High Spirit, which increases Leia's base health regeneration by 100. Even though Leia's shield is capable of regenerating all of Leia's health, it does so at a rate of 5 HP per second, which is extremely slow, as it should be, otherwise it would be overpowered. Having an extra 100 rapid health regeneration is extremely useful, and you are going to need it if you're trying to be aggressive with Leia, as you should be nowadays. In all honesty, I personally never remove these 3 cards. This is what I use all the time, because I think this is her strongest setup. However, I should mention Leia's secondary fire, which is a tracking shot that locks onto enemies at long range. Leia does have a star card called Laser Brain that makes her secondary fire a one-hit kill on most troopers, but if you want to regularly benefit from this star card, you basically just have to hide in the back of the map and just spam. I personally never like to do this. I don't find it fun whatsoever. As you can see, the gameplay in the background is from like a year ago before her rework, because I never used this strategy, but if you are planning on using her secondary fire, you should run Laser Brain, because it's pretty much unrivaled for that strategy. In all honesty, if you are hiding in the back of the map using this strat, her other star cards barely matter in that situation, but I'd recommend just using both of her E11 cards in case you do get forced into a tough situation and somebody tries to hunt you down. Moving on again, we have Lando, who is not a complicated hero when it comes to star cards. For trooper game modes, you'll want to run Hot and Cold, which just increases his base health by 150. Lando only has 650 health and has no damage reduction cards or even abilities with damage reduction, so bringing him up to 800 health from 650 is very necessary. Next up, you'll want to run Wide-Eyed, which just increases the distance at which Sharpshot can target enemies, so you'll be getting more kills and dealing more damage from further away. This card pairs very nicely with Maximized Efficiency, which reduces the cooldown of Sharpshot by 40% if you hit 3 or more targets. You don't have to kill 3 or more people, all you have to do is hit them, and honestly this gets triggered really often on big maps, which is where Lando excels anyway, and with this card you'll have Sharpshot ready to go basically whenever you need it. For hero-based game modes, you'll want to remove Maximized Efficiency, as you're not going to be hitting 3 targets at a time very often, and replace that card with Quick Shock, which increases his Disabler's stun time by 30% if you detonate it within 5 seconds of throwing it, which you should be doing pretty much all the time in hero modes anyway. With Finn, my setup depends almost entirely on whether I'm using him primarily to support my team and lock down an objective, or if I'm going on a kill streak on my own. If I'm going for a kill streak in a large-scale game mode, his 3 Deadeye star cards are the way to go. Stay Calm increases the duration of Deadeye by 40% every time you get a kill, which makes that ability so much better. No More Running increases the damage of Deadeye by 12, allowing you to kill everyone a lot faster, which is pretty self-explanatory and a very good card. The description says you have to kill 3 enemies in a row to get that increased damage, but that isn't true. The description is wrong and the extra damage is just applied immediately. You don't have to kill anyone. Finally, Finn also has a star card called Raise to Do One Thing, which increases the lock-on radius of Deadeye, so it'll jump to new enemies further to your left and right automatically. It doesn't increase your range in terms of distance, it just increases the angle at which Deadeye will find new targets. However, if you are using Finn as a support hero to lock down an objective, and especially if it's a relatively small objective, you'll only want to keep Stay Calm, which is his best Deadeye card, and you should really just always keep that card on in large-scale modes. For the other 2 slots, you're going to want to first run Beacon of Hope, which increases the radius of Big Deal by 40% if you affect at least 2 teammates, which in a tight objective will be very easy to do. It'd be hard not to hit 2 teammates with Big Deal. You'll also want to run 1 Resistance, which decreases the cooldown time of Big Deal by 40% if you affect at least 3 teammates, which again, on an objective should be very easy to do the vast majority of the time, especially when combined with the larger radius card. With those 3 cards, you'll be able to boost most of your team over and over again, and having Big Deal more often also means you'll have Deadeye more often, which is another great benefit. If you are playing for kills on more open maps, those 2 cards are going to be much less helpful, and the 2 Deadeye cards are going to help you out way more. But it just depends on what you're trying to accomplish and what type of situation you're in. In Heroes vs. Villains, Finn is really only a great choice if you have a team that is coordinated and will stick near you. If you're out by yourself and your teammates are nowhere to be found, Han, Leia, or basically any lightsaber hero is going to be a much stronger choice. However, if you are on a team that will support you and stay close to Finn and you want to use Finn, I'd recommend No More Running for the extra Deadeye damage, and also In Charge, which is a card that gives Finn increased damage reduction during Undercover Team the more damage he deals with it. This card is incredible if you can max it out. It makes Finn and this ability very, very strong against other villains because his pistol is actually quite good, and with that near 40% damage reduction, you can tank way more hits. For your 3rd card, either go with Raise to Do One Thing for the larger lock-on radius, or Beacon of Hope for the large Big Deal range. But with the 2nd card, with Beacon of Hope, you better have a really coordinated team so you can be boosting at least 2 of your 3 teammates, or this card is useless. But the extra range makes keeping your team boosted a lot easier, so if you can be boosting 2 teammates, this card is worth using. Alright, we've made it to the first droid, BB-8, who I'm just going to lump in with the Blaster Heroes. The first thing you'll want to know is that BB-8 only really has 4 cards worth using whatsoever, even once you have all of them unlocked. There is one specific card that is useful in one mode, but other than that, he really only has 4 good cards. The first and most important card he has is Whirlwind. This card is definitely his best overall, as it increases both the damage and the range of his cable spin substantially. This is going to help you kill everyone faster and from further away, and also will make it harder for enemies to escape before you kill them, because your cable spin range is going to be much larger. This card is just excellent, and no matter the mode, do not take this card off. Next up we have Spinner, and this card reduces the cooldown of BB-8's cable spin by 10 seconds if you hit at least 2 enemies, which you basically always will in Trooper game modes. You shouldn't be wasting a cable spin on one enemy anyway, so this card should always be used in Trooper modes. For BB-8's 3rd star card in large-scale game modes, I personally like to run Spared Batteries. This card increases the damage of BB-8's regular shock weapon by 7. The damage increase has to be earned by dealing damage to enemies, but everything you do counts towards that, including your cable spin, so you'll have that damage maxed out in no time. Once you do, his shock prod is actually quite strong and kills infantry very quickly. I should mention that BB-8 also has another very good star card for infantry modes, which is Self-Repairs. This card increases BB-8's health regeneration by 100, and man, this is a really nice card to have, and it pains me that I don't use it. Unfortunately, I've just found that BB-8's other star cards are, in most situations, more important in large-scale game modes if you want to get a lot of kills. If you are grabbing BB-8 near the end of the game and you are just going to cable spin to try to lock down an objective, take off Spared Batteries as you won't be able to build up that extra damage anyway, and throw on Self-Repairs for that extra health regeneration, because even though it's not better than his other 3 cards in most situations, it is a very strong card when maxed out, and I wish I could use it. For hero modes, you are going to want to run Spared Batteries for that extra damage, which is even more important against villains, and again Whirlwind for the extra cable spin damage and range. For your 3rd card, usually run Self-Repairs for the extra health regeneration. You can still run Spinner in hero modes for that reduced cooldown, but unlike in trooper modes, you will not be hitting multiple enemies to benefit from this every time, so I just prefer not to use this card as the other 3 will help you all the time. In Hero Showdown, you're going to want to stick with Self-Repairs for the extra health regen, and also Whirlwind for the extra cable damage and range. However, Spinner is mostly useless in that mode as there are only 2 enemies in total, and Spared Batteries is also basically useless because you can't build up that extra damage. Because of that, I just recommend running Headfirst, which increases the damage of BB-8's rolling charge by 40. This card definitely isn't incredible or anything even nearing incredible, but it is a nice damage boost, and more importantly, you'll actually be able to benefit from it in Hero Showdown, unlike some of his other star cards. Okay, switching back to the dark side, we may as well cover the other droid right after BB-8, so let's do BB-9E, and unfortunately this guy really only has 3 good cards. I guess he does have one fourth one that you should use in one specific situation, but overall he really just has 3 decent cards. His best card without a shadow of a doubt is Faster, and this card doubles the damage of his shock spin if you hit at least 2 enemies. This card is incredible in choke points, especially in hallways, because shock spin throws enemies away from BB-9E, which a lot of the time makes it more difficult for you to kill them, but in hallways where they'll just get thrown up against the wall, this card can really do a lot of damage in a choke point. For his second card, Full Reconstruction is the way to go, as this card just increases your health regen pool by 100. BB-9E has a quite low regen pool in general, so this card should really never come off because it's very helpful. Finally, you'll want to run Linked Systems, and this card is similar to BB-8's as it slowly increases the damage of BB-9E's Shock Prod. Although this card isn't based on damage dealt, it requires BB-9E to stun people with his weapon to earn that extra damage, and it also has a max increase of 8 versus BB-8's increase of 7, although BB-8 does start out with higher damage in the first place. For heroes versus villains, I would just recommend the same setup. You may not always benefit from Faster because you won't always hit 2 enemies, but in all honesty, he just doesn't have a better card to replace it, so it's definitely worth sticking with because there's really nothing else to use that's going to be better. In Hero Showdown, honestly, his card lineup is kind of sad. Faster isn't going to be that great because there are only 2 enemies in total, so the chances of you benefiting from it are quite low. Linked Systems is also a lot weaker in this mode, as even though it's based on stuns, you aren't going to be able to build that damage up to max during the majority of Hero Showdown rounds because they are so short. The only strong card in Hero Showdown for BB-9E is Full Reconstruction, just for the extra health regen. I'm going to recommend you still stick with Linked Systems for the extra damage, just because you will get partial benefit from it, and there just isn't anything else to replace it with that will help you out more in that mode. For his third card slot, I'd recommend Swift Power, which reduces the cooldown of Charge Up, and that's the ability that prevents your Shock Prod and nearby friendly blasters from overheating, but in Hero Showdown, most of the time all it will do is prevent your weapon from overheating, and that's the best third card he has for Hero Showdown. Like I said, if you just look over his cards, he has like 5 that do close to nothing in this mode, and a few that do very little, so we're working with what we have here. Moving over to the dark side, we have Captain Phasma, who is a hero with 2 star cards that should always be used if you do want to be running her best setup. The first is Not Hard Enough, which is far and away her best star card, as it grants her 50% damage reduction during Survivor, so you'll take just half of any incoming damage during the entire duration of that ability. You'll also want to run Safety First, which increases the health boost of Survivor by 60. Combined with Not Hard Enough and that 50% damage reduction, Safety First essentially gives Phasma an extra 120 HP every single time she uses that ability, which is pretty incredible. For her third star card in Galactic Assault and Supremacy, I really like to run Laser Wall Durability, and this card is glitched. Laser Wall was actually one of Phasma's originally planned abilities that were scrapped, and this card was called All For Myself, but then the name randomly changed one update. The dev said it was a bug, but never fixed it, and now the card is just called Laser Wall Durability for no apparent reason. Anyway, this card reduces the cooldown time of all of Phasma's abilities by 25% after getting 5 kills with her Staff Strikes. Her Staff Strikes are quite good now, and this card is really solid. In Supremacy, especially with all of the AI, getting 5 kills is super simple, and even in Galactic Assault it won't take you long, and having permanently reduced cooldown on Survivor is so powerful. In co-op, I usually take this card off and instead run Easy Shots, which just reduces the heat buildup on Phasma's blaster by 60% every single time she gets a kill. This card is really not necessary in game modes where you're playing against actual players, but against AI where they all rush at you at one time, this card is really nice because you can basically just keep firing indefinitely. For heroes versus villains, I keep both of her Survivor cards because honestly you should never take those off like I said, and in my third slot I run the More the Better. This card increases the rotation speed of the turret on top of Phasma's droid. Basically what this means is that once Phasma's droid has been activated, the turret portion will rotate and lock onto enemies way faster. Without this card, it's super easy for heroes to get out of the way of taking damage from her droid before it locks on, and with it her droid will lock onto heroes much quicker and start dealing damage to them before they can escape. This card's description is very vague bag, so I don't see people using it all that often, but against heroes who can move fast enough to get out of the way of the turret portion of her droid, this card is extremely good and honestly catches people by surprise really often. Boba Fett is up next, and thanks to DICE nerfing most of his best cards into the ground and outright removing another one, at this point he has one of the weaker star card lineups. The difference between a Boba Fett with no star cards and one with all purples really isn't that much. His best star card is definitely Born to Fly. This card reduces the cooldown of all of Boba's abilities while he's in the air, but does come with the slight drawback of increasing the time it takes for Boba's health to regenerate. Honestly, the downside is barely noticeable, and it's so easy to take cover and regen health as Boba that the 20% decrease in recharge times is very noticeable and is a worthy trade-off. It's very helpful for getting your rockets back especially. For his other two star cards, I should mention that both of his jetpack star cards are extremely minor upgrades. With both of them together, you barely get an extra 2 seconds of flight time, so I really don't recommend using these unless you need that extra 2 seconds, and they're extremely precious to you, because honestly, when I use these, it makes literally no difference because I can manage my fuel, and I think most people playing Boba can just manage their fuel. It's not really that difficult. I personally like to run Focalize, which increases the damage of Boba's rockets by 10 in the center of the radius. If you can land all of your rockets quite well, this is a total damage boost of 50. You definitely are not going to benefit from this card every time, and a lot of the times you're only going to get a partial benefit, but compared to the competition, this card is a good one. Finally, I like to run Acute Concussion, which increases the duration that Boba's rockets obscures enemy vision. This card was broken for quite some time, but it now works, and Concussion Rocket's blinding effect was also buffed pretty substantially, so these days it actually properly obscures enemy vision, so this card is quite useful even if it's only a minor upgrade. Those three cards are really my go-tos for all modes with Boba. He does have a lot of cards that really do close to nothing, so they're not even in my consideration, but those three that I just recommended together do make a noticeable difference, even if it's not as major as the changes other hero star cards make. Our next villain is one of the most difficult characters to lock down a best setup for, and that is Bossk. I think I'm going to shake this one up and instead start with the best hero mode setup, because that one is pretty straightforward. You'll first want to run multi-traps, which is his best star card against heroes by far. This one gives his proximity mines 2 extra mines, and also increases their detonation radius, so not only will the ability deal way more damage, it will also be much more difficult for enemies to avoid. You'll also want to run Trap Arming Speed, which increases the activation time of his proximity mines by 60%, so if someone steps onto them, they'll detonate way faster. This is especially important against heroes. The mines give a very distinct activation and warning sound when they are stepped on that gives lightsaber heroes in particular a ton of time to either get off them or just jump over them. But with this card, they'll detonate before they even know what hit them most of the time. Most of the time, nobody's going to be able to avoid your mines with this card on. Finally, you'll want to run Name Your Poison, which gives Bossk rapid health regeneration when standing in his Dioxis. This will allow you to throw down your Dioxis while heroes are attacking you, and while you're gaining health, they will be taking damage. When it comes to Trooper game modes, things are a bit complicated because in all honesty, most of Bossk's cards are good. I think to start out, I'm just going to tell you two that you shouldn't use because they are useless. The first is Spreading the Disease, and this card isn't worth using only because it doesn't do anything, it just doesn't work at all. The other card that should be avoided is Sniper Expert, and this card shouldn't be used not because it doesn't work, but because it's literally useless. It's a very weak card and is a waste of a slot. I'm just going to tell you guys what I use with Bossk because I've had great results with this setup. I again tend to run both of his proximity mine cards, multi-traps for the extra damage and area of effect, and trap arming speed for the fast detonation. Those cards together can lock down an entire lane of a map. No one is getting through other than a hero, who will be severely damaged if he gets through your mines in the first place. For his third card, I tend to run Lingering Dioxis, which increases the duration of Dioxis by 6 seconds, and with this card, by the time your last Dioxis grenade runs out, your new one will be close to coming off of cooldown. These three cards just make Bossk a beast at completely locking down entire areas, which, in my opinion, is where he excels the most, so that's what I try to capitalize on. There's no one better for area denial than Bossk. The only exception to that setup for me would be maybe in co-op, where you're dealing with AI and you can really manipulate that with Bossk to your advantage. For example, you could run a card like Ultimate Predator, which increases the duration time of Predator instincts by 30% with every kill, and if you combine that with something like Unrelenting Predator, which reduces your ability recharge times by 14% with every kill, you can end up just spamming Dioxis and mines constantly, and maybe throw on Name Your Poison for health and Dioxis so you don't die. And because there's just brain dead AI, you can just keep killing them and keep getting your abilities back, and never really come out of Predator instincts. Those cards are also valid in modes against actual people, but for my money I like to play Bossk as someone who locks down an area and keeps people out, and with the 3 cards I recommended, multi-traps, trap arming speed, and lingering Dioxis, you can do that exceedingly well. Next up we have Iden Versio, who I think will be the quickest hero to get through for me, as she has a very defined and all-around best loadout. The first and most important star card for her is Alternative Methods, which increases the fire rate of her secondary fire by 25%, so you'll be able to lob a blue ball of death towards enemies significantly more frequently. Her next slot should go to Droid Batteries, which decreases the cooldown of both your shield and her droid by 25%, which I kinda think speaks for itself. 2 of your abilities will recharge a lot faster. Finally, you'll want to run Cooled Blaster, which decreases the heat buildup of Iden's blaster by 15%. There is nothing worse than your blaster overheating in the middle of a fight, especially against heroes, and this card makes that a little easier to avoid. Let's talk about Papa Palps, who fortunately is very easy to pick cards for. At least most of the time I really don't bother changing his cards at all. His first and I would say most important star card is Lightning Reach. This card increases the range of Palpatine's regular Force Lightning by 30%, and this card is just essential. The extra range will let you begin damaging enemies sooner, which will save you health, and it will also allow you to keep your distance from lightsaber heroes, which is huge, and it also makes picking off stragglers who are trying to run away a lot easier. His second best star card is Show No Mercy, and this card permanently reduces the cooldown of Chain Lightning by 1/4 of a second every time you hit an enemy with it, so after you've hit 20 enemies in total with Chain Lightning, the ability will max out at a permanent 5-second reduction to your Chain Lightning cooldown, which kinda speaks for itself. You'll be able to use Chain Lightning way more often, which is so good. For Palpatine's third card slot, the star card you're going to want to run 90+% of the time is In Full Control. This card reduces the stamina drain of Palpatine's regular lightning attacks by 16%, meaning you're going to be able to attack longer before you ever run out of stamina. 16% isn't huge or anything like that, but other than in 2 very specific situations, this is definitely his third best star card. As I mentioned, there are 2 instances in which you should run other cards, and the first is in Hero Showdown, where Show No Mercy will be useless as there are only 2 enemies to hit, so you can't really hit enough targets with Chain Lightning to actually benefit from this card in any noticeable way. If you are going to run Palpatine in Hero Showdown, the card I would recommend in slot number 3 is the Rule of 2, which gives Palpatine a 30% damage boost against enemies who are currently electrocuted. This card isn't amazing or anything, but it's the best one he has in Hero Showdown for a third card. The other situation that you might want to shake up the main Palpatine setup is in very specific phases of Galactic Assault or other large-scale modes, where the rest of the match is going to take place in very close quarter situations with a lot of people bunched up very tightly together. The best example of that would be Phase 2 and 3 of Naboo. Once you get to Phase 2, the rest of the match is going to be indoors and very close quarters, so you don't really need that 30% of extra range from Lightning Reach. Thankfully, there's a third star card for Palpatine that really thrives in close quarters engagements, and that is Surge of Lightning. This card increases the number of targets that Chain Lightning can bounce to by 4. Chain Lightning, even without this star card, can already bounce to 5 enemies, so in most even moderately open areas, this card will not benefit you and will just be useless. However, in really close quarters areas where you don't need the extra range star card anyway, this card can score you some really satisfying multi-kills if enemies are grouped up together. Like I said, 90% of the time you'll want to go with Show No Mercy, In Full Control, and Lightning Reach, but there are a couple of places to shake it up. Well guys, that is going to do it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, these videos take me an insane amount of time to put together and get right, so if it did help you out and you could leave a like, I would definitely appreciate it. And if you are new around here, make sure to subscribe as we are coming up on 250k, and if you're already subscribed, be sure to hit that bell so you don't miss any future videos. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.